All right, welcome to the OFCCP's Institute web chat. You have David Cohen here in Washington, D.C., and my good friend Mickey Silverman sitting in Denver right now. Mickey, how are you?
I'm doing great.
Say
David
hello
and I
to
were just
everyone.
chatting about the fact that it's 50 degrees or so in DC and 90 degrees in Denver. So everything is right with the world right now.
So Mickey and I thought that what we do is kind of talk about really in a casual setting, some of the things that we're seeing with OFCCP right now, some of the developments, and really spend about 15 minutes. Before we get into that, once again, Mickey and I are here today with the OFCCP Institute. If you're not familiar with the OFCCP Institute, we are a nonprofit educational association. We provide training services. We do public comment and really just provide information to contractors as it relates to OFCCP. We are having our a fall session in Chicago on October 1st and 2nd. We've got a great faculty. We're going to be spending 2 days talking about a lot of the issues that Mickey and I are going to talk about right now. David Fortney will be joining as the co-chair with the two of us. We'll also have John Geyer from Paul Hastings. We'll have Val Hoffman from Seyfarth and Carter Younger from McGuire Wood. So we've got an all-star staff, as well as we'll have OFCCP joining with this go around. So we're excited about that. So first thing I want to talk about, Mick, there's been a bunch of cases that have been settled in the last week or so. It's interesting. I was looking at that. I think this is the first case that's been settled since I think June or July. So a lot are being settled, and it's not surprising, right, Mick? It's the end of the fiscal year.
Yeah, and that's right. And folks may not realize the timing of it, but September 30th is the end of OFCCP's fiscal year and the end of the federal government's fiscal year. And this is where we see the push from the agency, and at time, by the way, from contractors who see some opportunity for leverage with the agency to try to get deals done. And so we've seen a flurry of settlements over the last 2 weeks or so, and I think we expect to see in the couple of weeks before the end of the fiscal year, perhaps a number of them come down the pike as well.
Yeah, so we've had another steering case. So I think that makes 2 steering cases in fiscal year 2014. Coming fresh out of NILG, OFCCP said to expect a lot more steering cases. We had a traditional testing case coming from one of these settlements. And then really for the first time, we saw a failure to hire case that involved professionals. And you don't typically see failure to hire cases involving professionals, but we did see that with one of the more recent settlements.
We did. And, the one thing that's interesting to me about the 3 different ones, and there are things that are different between these settlements, but for those 3 most recent ones, as we've seen so often, while the OFCCP talks about pay as being a top priority, maybe the top priority, proving pay continues to be hard. And these are, by and large, hiring type cases, applicant to higher adverse impact results that the OFCCP has dressed up in some different ways. So the testing case had to do with a hiring case and the use of a test by an employer in the hiring process. The steering case as well. The OFCCP characterized it as steering and compensation, but it was still at its foundation, it was the issue of females disproportionately being, hired into certain jobs versus another job. And then we had the more traditional hiring case. Although you're right, what is noteworthy is it's in the white-collar setting, which is somewhat unusual for the agency.
So moving on to 503 and VEVRA, Mick, September 4th, OFCCP sent over a new electronic form to OMB for review and approval. I think this might have been as a result of the conversations between contractors and OFCCP at the national conference about an electronic form, what must be maintained, what have you. But what OFCCP just sent over to OMB is a new electronic form that has a drop-down menu embedded within the report. So now kind of it looks like it's going to be working more like the self-identification forms that we use for race, ethnicity, and protected veteran, but just how electronic forms are typically, embedded within an HRIS or ATS system. One caveat that I picked up on, and I mentioned this to OFCCP, it looks like, though, because of an Acrobat Adobe kind of issue, now it looks like there are 4 options for reporting: yes, no, I don't wish to, and then the default is the 4 ellipses. And the question is, do you have to record the 4 ellipses in the HRIS ATS system? I've mentioned that to OFCCP, and let's see if they pull that form back, make that one change to the Adobe form, and then resubmit it. But look for a new form that can be used electronically. In addition, they added 7 new languages. So we've got Russian and French and Chinese and Japanese and a couple other languages. So I think OMB will probably get that, review that, and approve it very quickly, so we'll have an electronic form.
I think that's probably right. And let's give the OFCCP credit for hearing what the contractor community had to say. There was a great give and take with them at the ILG National Conference, and they're taking steps. Nothing's ever exactly easy with the OFCCP, so I think you're right. They may need to pull this back for some fine-tuning, but they seem to be trying to meet the contractor community on their needs. And
we've said this all along. I think that they are learning kind of as we're learning and working through these regulations, and they're in there, trying to put out some FAQs, and they're trying to do some Q&As, and I think it's going to be a work in progress. So let's see what happens. Big news, right? The equal pay report. We knew it was coming. Why did we know it was coming, Mickey? Because the president told OFCCP to get it going. Tell me about the equal pay report. What happened? When are we commenting? What's the story?
Yeah, well, this is interesting. And in fact, for some of you may have been at the ILG National Conference. I had the chance to co-present with Pam Kukos. And this was right at the time that the equal pay report regulations, the proposed regulations, hit. It was during that week at the conference itself. All right, so the president says to OFCCP and EOC as well, you don't have the right tools in your toolbox to find what should be, they believe, the discrimination that exists, women making 77 cents on the dollar. And so there is this pay gap. What are the tools that you're using? And from that came OFCCP presidential memorandum issued saying, in essence, Department of Labor, specifically OFCCP, go create a new reporting form. And so the OFCCP did come out in early August with the regulations, proposed regulations, and a new report. It's called the Equal Pay Report. And it is along the lines of an EEO1 type report. The categories of employees are by EEO1 category. But the critical difference here is that you're going to be, if this goes to final, you're going to be providing pay information. It'll be W-2, so total wage type information on an annual basis. The reporting period will be for the previous year, and you will be required to submit this information in the first quarter of the following year. The theory being it'll minimize your burden because you'll have your W-2 information already gathered for the previous year. It'll be for your separate locations along the lines that you do the EO1 report. It's going to be for all your employees. You're going to have to provide race, ethnicity, and gender information. You'll have to provide hours information, hours worked, so that particularly for your non-exempt employees, the OFCCP will be able to take that total comp by EO1 category and by race and gender, divide by hours by race and gender to figure out at least what average pay or average wage we're looking at. And it's not entirely clear yet exactly how the OFCCP will use it or all the uses it can have for it, but it appears that primarily they'll want to use it as an audit selection tool, getting at those employers who may more likely be out of compliance on the pay side, given pay disparities. So we'll see more of the ins and outs of this, and we'll talk about it at our conference in October, but we're in an open notice and comment period right now that ends in early November. All of you listening and everyone else who's interested will have an opportunity now and through November, early November, to comment on this. So give this a read, make sure you get up to speed on it, and then we'll see where the OFCCP goes with it. But we anticipate there will likely be a equal pay report obligation that comes out in 2015 with a reporting obligation at the latest in early 2016. This is a big change, Dave.
I think it's a huge change, and I think, as you said, definitely recommend to contractors read the proposed rule, and because there are things that OFCCP didn't think through, So as you said, Mick, you're gonna use your let's just say your September roster for your EEO1 report. You're gonna capture that roster, but then you're gonna wait until the first quarter of the next year, and then you're gonna have to match up employee ID to the employee ID on the W-2 to pull that in. Here's the problem, right? The roster comes from the HRIS system. The W-2 comes from payroll. Two different systems. You're going to have to create some software to match that up. So I think there's more to it that needs to be thought through. But I know that we'll certainly be working on that with the Institute. We've put a consortium together of contractors to study this issue. We have a meeting next week here in Washington, D.C. We've got 20 very large contractors coming to talk through these issues and then put together substantive comments to OFCCP. And look, OFCCP is asking for those comments. They truly are asking for our input. And the more substantive kind of comments we can put in, the more likely that those will be taken into consideration when they go final.
But that's not all, Dave. Comp is just one piece of many executive orders that the president has come out with over the last couple months. So tell us about some of the other fun that we're having.
Well, it's interesting, right? You and I have been doing this for a long time, and I think that in the last 2 years, and then, in the year coming, there's probably more that's happening in terms of changes with OFCCP than the last 20 years combined. I think about it, right? And it's like during the Bush administration, 8 years, what were the big things? Compensation standards, internet applicant. And now we're talking about over the next year and what's happened, 503 in VEVRA, equal pay report. But now we've got more executive orders. And this is no surprise, right? The president said he will be using his pen and promulgating some executive orders. So the first one, we'll briefly talk through these because we're going to spend some time, like you said, at the conference, but the executive order on LGBT. And I commend the president. I think I'm certainly in support of that. What is going to be interesting about this executive order is it just strictly an anti-discrimination regulation? So we incorporate that into our EEO policy to say we will not discriminate based on a sexual orientation and gender identity. And then an employee can file a complaint with OFCCP if he or she are discriminated against. Or is it going to be that plus an affirmative action component? Because the affirmative action component is baked into the executive order. Are we going to get self-ID? Are we going to get affirmative action? Goals, utilization? We don't know until we see the proposed rules. So we've got an LGBT executive order. OFCCP is now working on the proposed regulation. But there's another one, the I'll call it the blacklist executive order. Mick, what's that all about?
Yeah, so this one's interesting, and there's a backstory to it, folks. So increasingly, and this started actually during the war in Iraq, increasingly we've had a movement afoot to account for, let's say, any fraudulent claims, either, let's say, from a government contractor or defense contractor who's putting in for billions of dollars. This is actually what happened. Billions of dollars, for the work that they were doing in Iraq, either during the war or as part of construction. And then there were hundreds of millions of dollars of that money that was put in as invoices with the government, where the services that were supposed to have been provided apparently never made it there, but the money at the same time disappeared. Well, there was some rules put in place in terms of reporting on any type of fraud that might result in violations. That's outside of the employment area, but taking that same spirit, what we've just recently seen is an executive order from the president, which will require employers to report on any violations that they get under 14 major labor and employment rules, regulations, and laws. Those are federal laws, but also under their state equivalent. So for instance, you've got wage and hour violations, this gets reported. You've got Title VII discrimination, ADA, FMLA, under our executive order 11246, and the vets and the 503 rules that come with it. Those are just some of these labor law, employment law rules that under this executive order, once it's final, you're going to have an obligation as a government contractor to report on those violations. You're going to have to, according to the executive order, go back 3 years in time and report on that information, and then update that information in a system that you're going to submit information to the government. You'll need to update it once every 6 months. How is this going to be used? Well, the devil's going to be in the details when we see regulations come out, but the vision is that for those employers that have violations that are egregious, and we'll have to see what that means from a formula perspective, but persistent, repeated, intentional, these are the words that are used in the executive order. If these are egregious violations, the government will be charged, each agency will be charged with taking your violation record into account in deciding whether to grant you future contracts, and it could have an impact on existing contracts, the cancellation of existing contract. So this is big. This is potentially has a huge impact on employers and the information that they might have to report regarding violations.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty crazy to think about it, that in theory, right, I have 10 OFCCP audits, I get 10 conciliation agreements, and now I'm bidding on a federal contract. There's going to be a compliance officer working at the contracting agency who's going to look at that and say, you know what, we don't think you're worthy of getting contracts. So stay tuned on that one. The other one that we got a copy today, but it's officially going on the Federal Register on Wednesday, is about the pay transparency rule. So that's being proposed on Wednesday. I think we've got 90 days to comment on that, if my memory serves me correctly. And that one, you know, I don't see that as being that big of a deal, because this is already covered under the National Labor Relations Act. But now this would include, you know, contractors that meet the, not even the 50-50 rule, the $10,000 rule, but it also covers management, which the National Labor Relations Act does not cover. So basically what it says, you cannot retaliate against an applicant or an employee for disclosing pay or discussing pay. So I think it may end up being just a policy issue, updating your policies, communicating to employees. Honestly, I don't see a lot of traction in terms of enforcement. Retaliation law is pretty complicated. And how's OFCCP going to prove that an applicant was not hired because they discussed pay with another applicant or with an employee? But certainly be interesting.
Yeah, well, let me just, on that, so this one's literally the proposed regs just dropped today, so let's see how this plays out. But to your point, David, I think much of this was covered by the National Labor Relations Act already, certainly not supervisors. One thing that's interesting is this pay transparency requirement clearly covers applicants. And I'll tell you, as a labor and employment lawyer, there's some question about how clearly the NLRA covers applicants.
Right.
Most do interpret it as uncovering applicants, but the way that stuff has played out in practice is around employees. But now, under these regs as they become final, you will have an obligation to ensure that, for instance, if an applicant, in response to a job offer, you offer them $45,000, and they say, thank you for the offer, I'd like to know what the other employees in the job currently are making. And they reach out to those individual employees and ask that. And the individual employees share that information. This is not so much a change in the law, but I think it may very well prompt a change in culture for much of corporate America. So folks, give this a read. The proposed regs, they're 92 pages. We have 90 days, as David said. But we'll be talking about this in detail at our conference in Chicago in October. We'll have some time to absorb, to digest those proposed regs at that point. It's a nice opportunity for you to hear and talk about it yourself and still be in a position to comment on it, either on your own as an organization, or if you want to do it perhaps through an employer advocacy group. But it'll be a nice place to get a conversation going about what are the implications of this and the other new executive orders and proposed regulations for your company.
So last thing, just talk to us a little about this is no surprise, right? The president signed the executive order on minimum wage, could not get it through Congress. So once again, an executive order on contractors. So tell us about the minimum wage.
Yeah, and this one also interesting. We have not seen a raise in the federal minimum wage in many years now. The president has been pushing this. It just didn't get traction in Congress. And so this is the power that any president has. He has the authority to make rules as it relates to the executive agencies. And the executive agencies, the executive branch, they give out the government contracts. That's us, and that's those of you listening into this web chat. And so the final regulations are going to come out in a matter of days. They need to come out no later than October 1st. It will require an increase in the minimum wage to $10.10 for certain employees, not all of your employees. These are service employees. It's working on particular government contracts and those who are necessary to the performance of the government contracts. This is another area where there is a devil in the details in terms of who it applies to, who it doesn't within your organization. Now, you need to think about as an employer, if you have certain employees less than $10.10 now, who you are required to raise, but others in the same job categories who aren't working on government contracts, who you're therefore not required to raise, do you nonetheless make the decision to raise across the board to be consistent with your organization? Or do you make the conscious decision to have different pays for perhaps the same job, but on different projects in different locations? So there are practical devil in the details elements to this that you want to think through. And this is one where get on your horse, because this is going to be out within a matter of weeks. You really want to think through the implications before it hits.
It's going to be fascinating. Think about, Mickey, what you just talked about, right? It only applies to those individuals that are working directly on contracts or necessary to the performance of the contract. Now, put that together with the pay transparency, and now you have two people that are working in the same job. One's making the 1010, one's not making the 1010, and they talk about their pay, and it has to do with the fact that a person's working on a contract. I could see OFCCP saying, you know what, that could be a steering issue. So it's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out, but certainly a lot going on in our space. I find it fascinating. There's more to come. I think we're going to see a lot of enforcement this year. These regs are going to have an impact on our clients and our members. So a lot coming, and we're talking more about this October 1st and 2nd at our fall conference in Chicago. And Mickey, as always, it's great to catch up. We could probably talk about this stuff for the next 5 days straight, but I think it's time to go. And thanks everyone so much for participating. Mick, parting thoughts?
Stay tuned, because this stuff is going to roll out and changes are going to be big in the near future, folks. So keep your ear to the ground, stay involved in the conversation, and make your voice heard on these proposed regulations. And thanks so much for spending time.
Yeah, thanks so much, everyone.
Take care, Dave.